The blood-stained wedding invitation arrived at dawn, and with it the scent of jasmine that hadn't bloomed in 3 centuries. The same scent that had filled the air the night Elara died in his arms, her mortal heart giving its last beat against his immortal chest. Wait, before the next revelation happens? If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Cassius thought for a moment, sifting through 3 centuries of memories. "She laughed at my jokes," he said finally, "even the terrible ones, especially the terrible ones. I remember once I tried to explain vampire politics to her using an analogy about chickens, and it made absolutely no sense. She laughed so hard she cried, and then she kissed me and said I was the most ridiculous immortal creature she'd ever met." Clara smiled, her eyes bright. "She sounds wonderful." She was, but so are you, Clara. And that's what I'm learning, that love doesn't replace itself. It transforms. You're not Elara reborn. You're yourself, carrying forward her kindness and her courage in a new form. And I think, he paused, finding the words, I think that's even more miraculous. The sun was climbing higher now, its rays beginning to burn. Cassius felt the familiar discomfort, the warning that his time in the light was ending. But Clara was watching the sunrise with wonder, her face illuminated by the golden glow, and he lingered just a moment longer. "Go," she said softly, noticing his discomfort. "I'll be here when you wake." It was such a simple promise, but it meant everything. Cassius squeezed her hand once, gently, then retreated into the shadows of the estate. Behind him, Clara remained in the garden, her fingers trailing through the jasmine blossoms as the new day began. The following weeks tested every assumption Cassius had ever made about duty, desire, and the possibility of happiness. True to the hastily renegotiated treaty, he returned to his northern territories with Clara, though not before ensuring she had the chance to say goodbye to her mother and the few friends she had among the Ashcroft servants. The journey north took 3 nights, and Cassius used the time to teach Clara about the vampire world she was entering, the hierarchies and customs, the dangers and protections, the strange blend of ancient tradition and modern adaptation that defined coven life. Clara absorbed it all with remarkable composure, asking intelligent questions and showing neither the blind fear nor the naive romanticism that often characterized humans who became involved with vampires. She was practical, curious, and unexpectedly funny, pointing out the absurdities in vampire protocol with a wit that reminded Cassius of Elara's irreverence. But she was also herself, quieter than Elara had been, more observant, with a deep thoughtfulness that took time to surface. Where Elara had been like sunlight, bright and immediate, Clara was like moonlight, subtle and revealing. Victor had prepared quarters for Clara in the mortal wing of the fortress, a suite of rooms that were luxurious by human standards but carefully separate from the vampire residential areas. It was a practical arrangement, allowing Clara privacy and safety while she adjusted to her new circumstances. "You're being cautious," Victor observed on their 4th night back, as he and Cassius reviewed reports in the strategy room. "I'm being respectful," Cassius corrected. "She gave up everything to come here. The least I can do is give her space to decide if this is truly what she wants." "And if she decides it isn't?" Cassius was silent for a long moment. "Then I let her go. I won't trap her the way the laws trapped Elara and me." But even as he said it, he knew he was already too deeply invested. Every evening when he woke, his first thought was of Clara. Every night they spent hours talking in the fortress library, or walking the ramparts under the stars, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. She told him about her life in the Ashcroft kitchens, the small joys and frustrations of mortal existence. He told her about the weight of leadership, the loneliness of immortality, the strange beauty of watching centuries unfold. And slowly, carefully, they began to build something that was theirs alone, not an echo of the past, but a foundation for the future. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after their arrival, during a crisis that threatened to undo everything. A delegation from the Eastern Coven arrived unannounced, led by an elder named Lucian, who had opposed the new treaty from the beginning. He demanded an audience with Cassius, and his tone suggested this was not a friendly visit. "The Eastern Council questions the validity of your proposed alliance," Lucian announced without preamble, his voice dripping with disdain. "A union between an alpha and a mortal servant? It's unprecedented, disgraceful." Cassius kept his expression neutral, though he could feel Victor tensing beside him. They were in the Great Hall, with most of his court present, a deliberate choice by Lucian to make this confrontation as public as possible. The treaty was negotiated in good faith by all parties. The treaty was cobbled together in panic to salvage a failed wedding, Lucian countered. Lady Morgana's marriage to Marcus is legitimate, a union of 2 ancient bloodlines. But your arrangement with this kitchen girl is nothing more than romanticized folly. The Eastern Council demands you select a proper bride from vampire nobility, or they will withdraw their support. It was a direct challenge to Cassius's authority, and worse, to the entire structure of the new alliance. The Eastern Coven withdrew, the carefully balanced peace would collapse, and they would be right back where they started, on the brink of war. The terms were agreed upon, Cassius said carefully. To change them now would be a violation of the treaty. Then perhaps the treaty itself is flawed. Lucian smiled coldly. Face reality, Lord Noctis. You can have your mortal plaything in private if you must, but for the sake of political stability, you need a vampire bride, someone who understands our world, who can stand beside you as an equal, someone who won't die in the blink of an immortal eye. The words hit their mark, awakening Cassius's deepest fear, the knowledge that Clara was mortal, that even if everything went perfectly, he would watch her age and die just as he had watched Ilara. Unless he turned her, which was forbidden without explicit permission from the Council of Elders, and which he wasn't sure she would even want. Lord Noctis does have someone who understands your world. Every head turned. Clara had entered the Great Hall, dressed not in servant's clothes, but in a gown of deep green that Victor must have arranged for her. She moved with quiet confidence, her eyes meeting Lucian's without flinching. "I may be mortal," Clara continued, "but I am not ignorant. I've spent the last 3 weeks learning everything I can about vampire politics, history, and law. I can recite the 7 treaties of the Ancient Compact. I can name every major house in the 4 territories and their primary assets. I know which councils meet when, and what protocols govern their proceedings." She paused. "More importantly, I understand what Lord Noctis represents, not just to the Northern Coven, but to the humans who live under vampire protection. His willingness to ally with mortals, to see us as partners rather than prey, is precisely what this new treaty offers. Stability not through force, but through genuine connection." Lucian stared at her, clearly surprised by her composure. "Pretty words from a human. But you're still mortal, still weak. What happens when you age and die? The alliance dies with you." "Then give permission for me to be turned," Clara said simply. The hall erupted into shocked whispers. Cassius felt his heart, long dead but still capable of metaphorical stopping, lurch in his chest. They had never discussed this, never even broached the subject of transformation. "Clara," he started. She turned to him, her eyes serious but calm. I've thought about this carefully, Cassius. I know what I'm asking. But if the only objection to our alliance is my mortality, then let's address it directly. I'm willing to become what you are, if the council permits it. You don't know what you're saying, Cassius said urgently, moving to her side. Transformation is agonizing. You would lose the sunlight forever, lose the ability to taste human food, I would gain centuries, Clara interrupted gently. Centuries to learn, to grow, to build something meaningful. And I would gain them with you. She took his hand. I'm not doing this out of obligation or fear. I'm doing it because in these 3 weeks, I've discovered that I don't want a normal human life anymore. I want this life, with all its strangeness and challenges. I want you. Lucian was watching this exchange with calculating eyes. The transformation of a human requires approval from the Council of Elders. The process takes months, and there's no guarantee they'll grant permission. Then we petition them, Clara said firmly. We present our case and let them decide. But we do it openly, honestly, as partners. That's what this new alliance is supposed to represent. Transparency and mutual respect, not secret deals and political maneuvering. It was brilliant, Cassius realized. By volunteering for transformation publicly, Clara was demonstrating her commitment while also forcing the Eastern Coven to either support the process or reveal themselves as obstructionists. And by framing it as a petition to the Council rather than a demand, she was working within the existing power structures instead of against them. Lucian clearly saw the trap, too. If he opposed the petition, he would appear to be sabotaging a legitimate attempt at alliance building. If he supported it, he would be accepting Clara's eventual place as Cassius's bride. Very well, Lucian said finally. I will recommend to the Eastern Council that they support your petition to the Council of Elders. But understand this, transformation is not guaranteed. The Elders may refuse, and if they do, this discussion will resume. It was a conditional victory, but a victory nonetheless. As Lucian and his delegation departed, the hall slowly emptied until only Cassius, Clara, and Victor remained. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, Victor said dryly. Probably both, Clara admitted. She looked at Cassius, and he saw uncertainty beneath her confident facade. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I should have discussed it with you first. But when he was attacking you, attacking what we're building, I couldn't stay silent. Cassius pulled her into his arms, feeling the warmth of her against his cold chest. You were magnificent. Terrifying, but magnificent. He pulled back to look at her face. But Clara, you need to understand what you're volunteering for. Transformation isn't just painful, it changes everything. Your senses, your needs, your very existence. And once it's done, it can't be undone. I know. Her hand came up to touch his face, her warm fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Cassius, I'm not Alara. I'm not going to die and leave you grieving for another 3 centuries. But I'm also not going to pretend I can be with you as a mortal forever. Eventually, we would face the same tragedy, just delayed by decades instead of years. This way, we have a chance at something else, something lasting. The Elders may refuse. Then we'll face that when it comes, but at least we'll have tried. She smiled, and in that smile, he saw not Elara's ghost, but Clara's own courage. Besides, someone needs to teach these ancient vampires that humans aren't just food sources or political pawns. We're partners, equals, and sometimes we're even smarter than you immortals give us credit for. Victor laughed quietly. I like her, my lord. She's got steel in her spine. That she does, Cassius agreed, pulling Clara close again. Against all odds, against all reasonable expectation, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe had given him a second chance. not to reclaim what he'd lost, but to build something new. The petition to the Council of Elders took weeks to prepare. Victor and Clara worked together, gathering historical precedents and crafting arguments that emphasized the political advantages of a human vampire transformation in service of alliance building. Cassius threw his considerable influence behind the petition, calling in favors and making carefully calculated promises to elders who held sway on the council. During this time, Cassius and Clara grew even closer. She moved from the mortal wing to quarters adjacent to his own, not sharing his bed yet, but near enough that they could spend evenings together without the barrier of the fortress between them. They fell into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and charged with anticipation, like the calm before a thunderstorm. She asked him endless questions about his long life, and he found himself telling her stories he hadn't shared with anyone, not just the grand historical events, but the small, personal moments that had shaped him. The night he'd been turned, terrified and alone, in a plague-ravaged village. The first time he'd tasted blood and felt the horror of what he'd become. The slow process of accepting his nature, of learning to be a predator who could still cling to scraps of humanity. And he asked her about her life, drawing out stories of kitchen gossip and small kindnesses, of dreams deferred and quiet rebellions. She had wanted to be a teacher, she told him one night, had wanted to help children learn to read, to open doors to worlds beyond their small villages. "You still can," Cassius said. "There's no reason a vampire can't teach." "A vampire who was once a kitchen servant?" Clara laughed softly. "I'm not sure the nobility would approve." "Then we'll teach the human children in Millbrook, or we'll start a school here in the fortress for the mortal servants' families." Cassius took her hand. "Clara, I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. I'm offering you the time and resources to achieve them on a grander scale. Centuries of teaching, of making a difference. Imagine what you could accomplish." The wonder in her eyes told him he'd said the right thing. "I never thought of it that way." "That's because you're still thinking like someone with only decades to plan. Start thinking in centuries, Clara. We could build institutions that last millennia. We could change the world, slowly but surely." It was in moments like these that Cassius felt the full weight of what they were building. Not just a romance, but a partnership that could reshape the relationship between vampires and humans. Clara wasn't just his chance at personal happiness. She was a bridge between two worlds that had existed in uneasy coexistence for too long. The Council of Elders finally convened 6 weeks after the petition was submitted. They met in neutral territory, an ancient castle in the mountains that belonged to no single coven, but served as common ground for major decisions. Cassius and Clara traveled there with Victor and a small honor guard, knowing that everything they'd built could be destroyed by a single word from the council. The elders were exactly as intimidating as Cassius remembered, 7 vampires so ancient that they predated written history, their eyes holding the weight of millennia. They sat in a semicircle on thrones carved from single pieces of obsidian, their faces expressionless as Cassius and Clara approached. "Lord Cassius Noctis," the elder spoke, her voice like wind over stone. "You petition for permission to transform the human Clara, descendant of Ilara, into a vampire. State your case." Cassius had prepared for this, but now that the moment had arrived, he found the formal arguments falling away. Instead, he spoke from the heart. 300 years ago, I loved a human woman named Ilara. She died because I couldn't save her, because the laws forbade me from offering her the transformation that might have preserved her life. I accepted that loss because I understood the reasons for the law. Uncontrolled transformation threatens the balance between our species, creates rogues and monsters. He paused, but times have changed. The treaty we've negotiated between the Northern Coven and the human territories depends on genuine connection, on showing humans that we see them as equals rather than prey. Clara's transformation, done with full council approval and proper training, would symbolize that partnership. It would prove that we're willing to elevate humans who prove themselves worthy, rather than keeping them forever beneath us in the hierarchy. One of the elders stirred. Yet you loved this woman's ancestor. How do we know this is about politics and not merely about satisfying your personal desires? Because it's both, Clara said, clearly, stepping forward, and that's precisely why it matters. The elders focused on her, and Cassius felt a surge of protectiveness. But Clara stood firm under their ancient gazes, her chin lifted. Lord Noctis does love me, she continued, or is beginning to. And yes, part of his motivation is personal, but that doesn't invalidate the political significance. The whole point of the new treaty is that vampires and humans are people, not just political pieces. We have feelings, loyalties, connections that matter. Lord Noctis is willing to stake his reputation and his alliance on me, because he sees me as worthy, not despite my humanity, but including it. That's the message the treaty is supposed to send, that humans have value beyond our blood. Another elder spoke, his voice deep and resonant. If we approve this transformation, we set a precedent. Other vampires will petition to turn their human lovers, their servants, their favorite meals. Where does it end? It ends with standards, Victor interjected, stepping forward to stand with Cassius and Clara. The council already has the authority to approve or deny transformations. Granting this petition doesn't mean granting all petitions. It means establishing that transformations for alliance-building purposes, when the human is willing and prepared, can be approved. Clara has studied our laws and customs extensively. She understands what she's asking for. That's not true of most humans who get turned. The elders conferred in whispers, too quiet even for vampire hearing. Some ancient language that predated speech itself, perhaps, or simply thoughts exchanged through centuries of connection. Cassius held Clara's hand, feeling her pulse steady and strong. Whatever happened, they had made their case as well as possible. Finally, the eldest elder spoke again. We have a concern that has not been addressed. Lord Noctis, you loved Ilara. How do you know that your feelings for Clara are genuine and not merely a projection of old grief onto a convenient vessel? It was the question Cassius had been asking himself since the night in the Jasmine Garden. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing not the echo of Ilara, but the woman she actually was. Clever, brave, stubborn, kind, with her own dreams and fears and quirks. I don't know, he admitted, not with absolute certainty. But I know this. When I'm with Clara, I'm not thinking about the past. I'm thinking about the future, about the school she wants to build, about the political reforms she suggests, about the way she makes me laugh when she points out the absurdities in our ancient protocols. Ilara taught me I could still feel love. Clara is teaching me I can build a life around it. He turned to the elders. You ask if my feelings are genuine? I can only tell you that I would lay down my position, my title, and my alliances for this woman. Not because she resembles someone I lost, but because of who she is now, in this moment. If that's not genuine, then I don't know what is. Clara squeezed his hand, and when he glanced at her, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. The elders were silent for a long moment. Then the eldest nodded slowly. Very well. We grant permission for the transformation under the following conditions. First, Clara must undergo a year of intensive training in vampire culture, law, and history before the transformation occurs. Second, the transformation must be witnessed by a council representative to ensure it is done properly.
Third, both Clara and Lord Noctis must submit to a blood bond that will allow the Council to monitor the results of this experiment. If the transformation produces a rogue or proves detrimental to either party, the Council reserves the right to intervene. The terms were strict but fair. Cassius bowed deeply. "We accept, with gratitude." "One more thing," the eldest added. Clara, child, approach. Clara walked forward alone, stopping at the base of the obsidian thrones. The elder studied her with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. "You carry the blood of Elara, who once showed kindness to a young vampire at great personal risk. That kindness rippled forward through time, shaping Lord Noctis into the leader he became. Now you offer your own sacrifice, your mortality, your sunlight, to continue that legacy of bridge building between our species." The elder's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "We approve this transformation, not just for political reasons, but because you remind us that some humans are worth preserving. Honor that judgment, child. Make your immortality count." "I will," Clara promised. "I swear it." As they left the council chamber, Cassius felt lighter than he had in 3 centuries. A year of training lay ahead, and the transformation itself would be agonizing, but they had been given permission. Clara would have the chance at immortality that Elara had been denied. Outside, under a sky full of stars, Clara turned to him with a brilliant smile. "We did it!" "You did it," Cassius corrected. "Your speech convinced them." "Our speech," she amended, pulling him down for a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. Victor cleared his throat politely. "My lord, we should return to the fortress. There's much to arrange." "In a moment," Cassius said, not taking his eyes off Clara. "First, I have a question." He took her hands in his. "Clara, you've given up your mortal life for this, for me, for the alliance we're building. You've faced down ancient elders and political opponents with more courage than most immortals. You've done all this, and we've known each other for mere weeks. So I need to ask, do you truly want this? Not the politics, not the grand alliance, just this, you and me building a life together?" Clara laughed, the sound bright in the darkness.
"Cassius Noctis, are you asking if I love you?" "I suppose I am." She cupped his face in her warm hands. "I do. I don't know if it's the echo of Elara's soul or just my own foolish heart, but I love you, the grumpy, ancient, occasionally ridiculous you. And I'm choosing this, choosing you, with my eyes wide open." "Then I have one more question," Cassius said, pulling a small box from his coat. Inside was a ring, not ornate or flashy, but simple and elegant, set with a stone the warm brown of summer earth. "Will you marry me? Not for politics, not for the alliance, but because I love you, and I want to spend the next 1,000 years learning everything about you." Clara's breath caught. "You had this made?" "Victor commissioned it while we were preparing the petition. I wanted to be ready, in case," he trailed off, "in case we got our miracle." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting centuries to find its proper owner. Then he kissed her again, deeper this time, tasting salt from her tears and feeling the warmth of her life against his cool lips. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to mortal or immortal concerns. But in that moment, under their cold light, 2 people who had found each other across an impossible divide held each other tight and believed in forever. The year of Clara's training passed in a blur of intensive study and careful preparation. She proved to be an exceptional student, absorbing vampire law and history with the same dedication she had once applied to learning recipes in the Ashcroft kitchens. More impressively, she began implementing changes even before her transformation, establishing preliminary communication channels between the Northern Coven and the human villages, mediating disputes that arose between mortal servants and their vampire employers, and generally proving that the alliance wasn't just political theater. Morgana and Marcus married in a spectacular ceremony that united the Southern and Eastern covens, and to everyone's surprise, the political marriage blossomed into genuine affection. Morgana wrote to Clara regularly, the two women forming an unexpected friendship based on their shared experience of navigating vampire politics as relative outsiders. As for Cassius and Clara, they fell into a partnership that felt both comfortable and exhilarating. She moved into his quarters fully, and though they maintained certain boundaries, Clara insisted on waiting until after the transformation for full physical intimacy, wanting to experience it as an equal rather than as a fragile mortal. They built a life rich with conversation, laughter, and shared purpose. Clara started her school for mortal children, teaching reading and writing 3 evenings a week in a room Victor had repurposed in the fortress. Cassius would sometimes watch from the doorway, seeing her patience with the struggling students, her joy when concepts finally clicked. This was who she was meant to be, a teacher, a bridge, a beacon. The transformation was scheduled for the anniversary of their engagement, under the full moon in the same garden where they had first met. The council sent a representative, a solemn vampire named Thorn who would ensure everything was done according to ancient protocol. The night arrived, and with it, the moment that would change everything. Clara stood in the jasmine garden, dressed in white, her face calm despite the fear he could smell on her skin. The transformation process was brutal. Cassius would need to drain her nearly to death, then feed her his own blood, then keep her alive through 3 nights of agonizing change as her body rebuilt itself into something immortal. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, giving her one final chance to change her mind. "I've been ready since the night you asked me about my grandmother," Clara said. She touched the jasmine gently, breathing in its scent one last time with human senses. "But Cassius, promise me something. Anything. If I don't survive this, if something goes wrong, promise me you won't blame yourself. I'm choosing this freely, with full knowledge of the risks. Whatever happens, it's not your fault. Clara, promise me," she insisted. "I promise." The words tasted like ashes, but he gave them anyway. She smiled, then kissed him softly. "I love you, Cassius Noctis, now and always." "I love you too," he whispered against her lips. "Now and always." Then he bared his fangs, and she tilted her head, offering her throat with the same courage she had shown the elders. Cassius bit down, and her blood filled his mouth, sweet and warm and alive. He drank slowly, carefully, feeling her life flow into him even as he took it away. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing grew shallow, and when he finally pulled back, she collapsed into his arms. Working quickly, he bit his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded, and she obeyed with the last of her strength, taking his cold vampire blood into her body. Then the agony began. Clara's transformation was the longest 3 days of Cassius's existence. She screamed and writhed as her body died and remade itself, as her bones hollowed and strengthened, as her senses sharpened to supernatural levels. He held her through it all, whispering encouragement when she could hear him, simply being present when she couldn't. On the 3rd night, as the full moon rose again, the screaming stopped. Clara lay still in his arms,
so motionless that for one terrible moment, Cassius thought she had died truly and completely. Then her eyes opened, and they were no longer brown, but shot through with veins of silver, the mark of a vampire newly transformed. "Cassius?" Her voice was rough from screaming, but underneath it, he heard new strength, new power. "I'm here. You're safe. It's done." She sat up slowly, testing her new body. "Everything is so loud and bright, and I can smell, I can smell everything." Wonder filled her face. "Is this what the world has always been like for you?" "Yes," he said, helping her stand. "Welcome to immortality, Clara Noctis." She tested the name, her new name. Clara Noctis. I like it. Then she looked down at her hands, flexing fingers that could now crush stone. "I'm really a vampire?" "You really are." Can I see myself?" Cassius led her to a mirror, and she stared at her reflection, paler now, sharper, with those silver-shot eyes, and a grace that had always been present but was now amplified to inhuman levels. "I'm beautiful," she said, sounding surprised. "You always were. Now everyone else can see it too." She turned to him, and suddenly she was in his arms, kissing him with a fervor that was entirely new. No fragility, no need to be gentle, just pure desire and connection between equals. They stumbled back to his quarters, shedding clothes and inhibitions, and made love for the first time as true partners. Vampire and vampire, immortal and immortal, bound together not just by love, but by the blood they now shared. Later, wrapped in silk sheets as dawn approached, Clara traced patterns on Cassius' chest. "Tell me about the future," she murmured. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What we'll do, where we'll go. We have centuries now. How will we spend them?" Cassius considered. "Well, there's your school to expand, and the alliance between vampires and humans to strengthen." "And I've always wanted to see Asia. We could travel, learn new cultures, new customs. And I want to write," Clara said thoughtfully. "Record the stories of ordinary people, humans and vampires alike, so that centuries from now, someone will know what life was like in our time." "A historian?" Cassius smiled. "You'll put the Council's official records to shame." "That's the plan." She kissed his jaw. "And children? Can vampires have children?" "It's rare, but possible, with considerable effort and often the intervention of magic. Would you want that?" "Maybe. Someday, when we've had a few decades to just be us." She settled more comfortably against him. "I just wanted to know if it was an option. We have time to decide everything, don't we?" "All the time in the world," Cassius agreed. As the sun rose and they settled into the death sleep it claimed all vampires during daylight hours, Cassius held his wife, for they had married in the transformation itself, bound by blood more deeply than any ceremony could achieve, and felt, for the first time in 4 centuries, complete. Ilara's love had taught him to feel again. Clara's love had taught him to live again. They were different women, different souls, but both had left their mark on his eternal existence. And now he had centuries to honor both legacies, to be the leader his people needed, the husband Clara deserved, and the bridge between vampire and human that could change the world. 50 years passed. The alliance grew stronger, more sophisticated. Clara's school expanded into a full academy, teaching both human and vampire children, breaking down centuries of segregation and mistrust. The model spread to other territories, and slowly, painfully, the relationship between the two species began to transform. Cassius and Clara became legendary, the vampire lord who had married a kitchen servant, proving that power could be tempered with love and that alliances built on genuine connection were stronger than those built on fear. Morgana and Marcus had 2 children, rare vampire offspring who became symbols of the new age. The covens were still fractious, still prone to political maneuvering, but the threat of open war had receded. The new generation was growing up in a world where cooperation was normal, where humans were partners rather than prey. On the 50th anniversary of Clara's transformation, Cassius arranged a private dinner in the Jasmine Garden where everything had begun. The flowers still bloomed, carefully tended by succeeding generations of gardeners who didn't know why this particular patch was so important to the Northern Lord and his lady. Clara arrived dressed in midnight blue, her silver-shot eyes sparkling with amusement. "You're being romantic again. Can't an ancient vampire romance his wife? You can, but it usually means you've done something that requires grand gestures." She sat across from him, accepting a glass of wine. They could drink it now, both of them, though it provided no real sustenance. "What have you arranged?" "Nothing terrible, I promise." Cassius reached across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking about what you asked the night of your transformation, about children." Her expression shifted to surprise, then cautious hope. And I've consulted with several covens who specialize in vampire fertility magic. It's complicated, expensive, and not guaranteed, but he pulled out a small vial filled with shimmering liquid. "This potion, combined with the right rituals and considerable luck, might give us a chance." Tears, blood tears now, the only kind vampires could cry, welled in Clara's eyes. "You want children with me?" "I want everything with you," Cassius said simply. The school, the alliance, the travel, the writing, and yes, children, a family, a legacy that's more than just political. Clara came around the table and sat in his lap, cradling his face in her hands. "You're the most wonderfully surprising creature I've ever met, Cassius Noctis." "I learned from the best," he said, kissing her softly. "A kitchen servant who faced down the Council of Elders and won." "I had a good teacher," she countered, "an alpha vampire who learned to love again." They sat together under the stars, breathing in the jasmine scent that had started everything, and talked about the future, about the children they might have, the school Clara wanted to expand into a university, the reforms Cassius was planning to propose to the Grand Council. They talked about going to Asia finally, about writing Clara's historical chronicles, about all the small and large dreams that immortality made possible. "Do you ever wonder," Clara asked eventually, "if Ilara is watching? If somehow her soul knows that we found each other?" Cassius considered the question seriously. "I like to think she'd be happy. She always wanted me to find peace, to not spend eternity alone. You've given me that, Clara. You've given me everything." "We've given each other everything," she corrected. "That's what partnership means." "That's what love means," Cassius agreed. As the night deepened and the jasmine scent wrapped around them like a blessing, they made plans and promises, secure in the knowledge that they had all the time in the world to fulfill them. The forced marriage that never happened had led to something far more precious, a choice made freely, a love built patiently, and a future that stretched forward into infinity. Sometimes Cassius still thought of Ilara, not with the sharp grief of old wounds, but with gentle gratitude. She had been his first love, the one who showed him that even monsters could feel human emotions. But Clara was his eternal love, the one who showed him that grief could transform into hope, and that second chances, when they came, were worth every risk.
In the garden where past and present had collided, where a vampire lord had met a kitchen servant and recognized destiny, the jasmine continued to bloom. And 50 years, 100 years, 200 years later, it would still be blooming, a silent witness to the love story that had changed everything. Not because it was fated, but because two people had chosen each other, again and again, through every challenge and triumph. That, Cassius had learned, was the real magic, not in blood bonds or ancient prophecies, but in the daily choice to love, to trust, to build something lasting. He looked at Clara, his wife, his partner, his future, and smiled. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I'm the luckiest vampire who ever existed." "Took you 50 years to figure that out?" Clara laughed, the sound bright and free. "I could have told you that on day one." "Then you're wiser than I am." "Obviously." She kissed him, then stood and pulled him to his feet. "Come on, let's go check on the academy. I want to see how the new students are settling in." "At midnight? We're vampires. Midnight is the perfect time." She tugged him toward the fortress, but paused at the garden gate to look back at the jasmine one more time. "Thank you," she whispered to the flowers, to the memory of Alara, to the universe that had brought them together. Then she turned back to Cassius, her eyes bright with love and mischief and the sheer joy of existing. "Race you to the library? You know I'm faster. But I'm smarter. I'll take shortcuts." She was already moving, her vampire speed carrying her away in a blur. Cassius laughed and gave chase, feeling more alive than he had in 4 centuries. The jasmine scent lingered in his senses, but it no longer brought pain, only gratitude for the journey that had led him here, to this moment, to this woman, to this life. He had been forced to wed for power, but he had found love instead. And in the end, that love had proven more powerful than any political alliance could ever be. Final report. Body word count, TCA included. 12,498. Noctis stood at the window of his fortress overlooking the shadow-draped valley of Tenebris, the invitation trembling slightly in his ancient hands. He was the alpha of the Northern Coven, the most powerful vampire in the realm. Yet, in this moment, he felt as powerless as the human boy he'd been 400 years ago. The ornate script announced his betrothal to Lady Morgana Ashcroft, daughter of the Southern Lord, a union forged not in affection, but in cold political necessity. The vampire territories were fracturing, old alliances crumbling like dried leaves, and only this marriage could prevent the war that would consume them all. But it was the jasmine that undid him. "My lord." The voice came from the doorway, cautious and respectful. Victor, his second in command, had served him for 2 centuries and knew better than to intrude without cause. "The council awaits your answer." Cassius didn't turn from the window. Below, the mortal village of Millbrook stirred with early morning life, its inhabitants unaware that their peaceful existence hung by a thread. The truce between vampires and humans was fragile, maintained only by the strength of the covens. If the vampire territories fell into civil war, that truce would shatter, and the humans would suffer most of all. "Tell them I accept," Cassius said, his voice hollow. Victor hesitated. "My lord, if I may." "You may not." Cassius crushed the invitation in his fist, though it did nothing to extinguish the memory the jasmine scent had awakened. "Inform Lord Ashcroft that I will honor the arrangement." The ceremony will take place at the full moon, as tradition demands. When Victor departed, Cassius finally allowed himself to remember. 300 years ago, he had been different, younger in spirit if not in body, still clinging to fragments of his human heart. He had walked through Millbrook's predecessor village one spring evening and seen her,
Elara, tending her grandmother's flower garden, her hands gentle among the jasmine blossoms. She had looked up at him with eyes the color of summer earth, and something in his dead heart had stirred back to painful life. Their love had been impossible from the beginning. She was mortal, vibrant, burning with the brief, bright flame of human existence. He was eternal, cold, bound by laws older than kingdoms. For 2 years they had stolen moments together, midnight meetings in her garden, whispered conversations beneath stars that watched with ancient indifference. She had never feared him, even when he finally revealed what he was. Instead, she had touched his face with those earth-warm hands and said, "I don't care what you are, Cassius. I care who you are." But mortality was a cruel master. Elara had fallen ill that final autumn, some sickness that even his vampire blood could not cure. Turning her was forbidden. The laws of the covens were absolute on that point. Unauthorized transformations meant death for both maker and offspring. He had held her through those last terrible nights, feeling her heartbeat grow fainter, her breath more labored. In the end, she had died in his arms, her last words a promise: "Find me again. Somehow, find me." He had searched for 3 centuries, hunting through reincarnations and lifetimes, but the soul he sought had never returned. Or, if it had been so transformed that he could not recognize it. Eventually, he had buried his grief beneath duty and power, becoming the alpha the Northern Coven needed, ruthless when necessary, strategic always, and utterly alone. The jasmine scent lingered in the room like a ghost. The Ashcroft estate sprawled across the southern highlands like a sleeping dragon, all dark stone and iron gates. Cassius arrived 3 nights before the wedding, accompanied by Victor and a modest guard, a deliberate show of trust that he did not feel. Lady Morgana's father, Lord Erasmus Ashcroft, greeted him with the cold courtesy of a man brokering a business transaction. Lord Noctis. Erasmus was ancient even by vampire standards, his face a mask of aristocratic composure. "Your presence honors our house." "The honor is mine, Lord Ashcroft." Cassius delivered the required pleasantries while his eyes scanned the assembled household. Servants moved like shadows, their pulses quickening nervously when he looked their way. Behind Erasmus stood a woman of severe beauty, Lady Ashcroft herself, presumably, and beside her. Cassius froze. The girl couldn't have been more than 20 in mortal years, though with vampires appearances meant nothing. She was slender, dressed in a gown of deep crimson that contrasted sharply with her pale skin, her dark hair bound in an elaborate style that suggested noble breeding. But it was her eyes that stopped his ancient heart. Brown, deep and warm, exactly the color of summer earth. "My daughter, Morgana," Erasmus said, gesturing the girl forward. She moved with practiced grace, but Cassius detected something beneath the surface, a tension, perhaps even reluctance. When she curtsied, he caught her scent, roses and iron, vampire nobility through and through. Nothing like Jasmine, nothing like Elara. "Lord Noctis," Morgana said, her voice carefully neutral. "I am honored by this union." The formal words rang hollow, and Cassius found himself studying her face, searching for any hint of warmth in those earth-colored eyes. There was intelligence there, certainly, and perhaps sadness, but no recognition, no spark of the soul he had loved. "The honor is mine, Lady Morgana," he replied, equally formal. The first dinner was a torturous affair of political maneuvering and veiled threats disguised as pleasantries. Erasmus and the other southern lords made it clear that this marriage was the price of peace, Without it, they would align with the Eastern Covens, and the Northern territories would find themselves isolated and eventually overwhelmed. Cassius played his role, agreeing to territorial concessions and trade agreements, all the while watching his future bride. Morgana spoke little, offering only brief responses when directly addressed. Her eyes remained downcast for most of the meal, but once Cassius caught her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, assessment, perhaps, or calculation. She looked away quickly when their gazes met. After dinner, as the others retired to discuss further arrangements, Cassius found himself alone in the estate's vast library. He had claimed he wanted to review certain historical documents regarding the marriage rites, but in truth, he simply needed to escape the suffocating weight of it all. The jasmine scent had faded, but the memory it had awakened refused to be buried again. "You're not what I expected." Cassius turned sharply. Morgana stood in the doorway, still in her crimson gown, but her posture had changed, less rigid, more natural. She closed the door behind her with deliberate care. "Neither are you," Cassius replied cautiously. She moved into the room, her fingers trailing along the spines of ancient books. "They told me you were ruthless, calculated, that you'd killed 50 men in the border wars without mercy. All true. Yet you look at me like you're at a funeral." Her eyes met his, sharp and assessing. "Your own funeral." Cassius said nothing, unsure how to respond to such directness.
Morgana stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the fine details of her face, a small scar near her left temple, barely visible. A story there, perhaps. "Let me be equally direct, Lord Noctis. I don't want this marriage any more than you do." "Then why agree to it? Why did you?" she countered. "We both know the answer. Duty, survival, the weight of all the lives that depend on our choices." Her voice carried a bitter edge. "My father has made it clear. This marriage secures our family's position for the next millennium. Without it, we risk being absorbed by the Eastern Covens, our bloodline diluted or extinguished." "And what do you risk?" Cassius asked quietly. Something flickered across her face, pain, quickly masked. "Everything that matters. But then you already know about sacrifice, don't you?" The observation was too keen, too precise. Cassius studied her with new interest. "You've been investigating me. Of course. Would you enter a political marriage blind?" Morgana moved to the window, her back to him. "I know about the border wars, your consolidation of the Northern Covens, your reputation for absolute loyalty to your people. What I don't know is why a vampire of your power and status has remained unmarried for 4 centuries. Most alphas take mates within their first century. Perhaps I never found the right match. Or perhaps you already did." She turned, and now her eyes held something new, understanding, perhaps even sympathy. "The servants talk, Lord Noctis. Old stories, passed down through generations. Stories about the Northern Alpha who once loved a human girl, who watched her die because the laws forbade him from saving her." Cassius felt the words like silver through his heart. "Those are just stories." "Are they?" Morgana took a step closer. "Because I see the way you carry yourself, like a man already dead, just going through the motions. I recognize it, because I see the same thing in my mirror every morning." "And what do you mourn, Lady Morgana?" Her laugh was soft and bitter. "Freedom, choice, the life I might have lived if I hadn't been born into this bloodline." She paused, then added quietly, "And love, I suppose, though I never had the chance to experience it before it was taken away." "Taken away?" Morgana's hand moved unconsciously to the small scar near her temple. "A story for another time, perhaps. The point is, we are both prisoners of duty, Lord Noctis. But perhaps we can be honest prisoners, at least with each other. This marriage is a political necessity, nothing more. We need not pretend affection we don't feel. It was a sensible arrangement, logical even. Yet something in Cassius rebelled against the cold practicality of it. And if, in time, something more develops, then we will face that complication together. Morgana extended her hand, not in the formal greeting of nobility, but in the simple gesture of equals making a pact. Until then, we are allies in this negotiation, nothing more and nothing less. Agreed? Cassius took her hand. Her skin was cold, as all vampire flesh was, but her grip was firm and honest. Agreed. As she left, he found himself thinking that perhaps this marriage would not be the torment he had imagined. Morgana was intelligent, direct, and clearly as trapped as he was. They could build something functional, if not warm, a partnership of mutual respect and shared purpose. It would never love. But perhaps, after 3 centuries, he had learned that love was too dangerous to risk again anyway. The jasmine scent was gone now, replaced by the musty smell of old books and candle wax. Cassius told himself that was for the best. He was wrong. The wedding preparations consumed the next 2 days in a whirlwind of tradition and ceremony. Cassius endured fittings for formal attire, meetings with the officiant who would conduct the ancient rites, and endless discussions of the treaty terms that would be formalized alongside the marriage vows. Through it all, Morgana remained politely distant, playing her role as the dutiful bride while maintaining the honest distance they had agreed upon. But on the night before the wedding, everything changed. Cassius was walking the estate grounds, unable to sleep despite the approaching dawn. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, and tonight, by vampire reckoning, he would be bound to Morgana by ties that even death could not easily sever. The thought should have brought resignation, perhaps even a grim satisfaction that he was doing his duty. Instead, he felt only a deep, aching emptiness. That was when he smelled it again. Jasmine. He followed the scent through the formal gardens, past sculpted hedges and ornamental fountains, until he reached the estate's southern wall. There, in a corner that seemed forgotten by the otherwise meticulous groundskeepers, grew a wild patch of jasmine, its white blossoms glowing in the moonlight. And standing before it, her fingers gentle among the flowers, was a young woman he had never seen before.